She said to her mistress, if only he would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would heal him from his leprosy. Wow. She has a pivotal role, no doubt about it. But again, she's not named. Naaman went to his master. Who's his master? The king of Aram. You got it. By the way, the king of Aram, what's his name? You'd think he's fairly important, wouldn't you? Not in this story. Not in this story. He's not named. King of Aram, not named. So, he told him what the girl from Israel had said. I love this. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I'll give you a letter to take to the king of Israel. Oh, things get really in a mess in a hurry here. So, Naaman left. He took 750 pounds of silver with him. He also took 150 pounds of gold, and he took 10 sets of clothing. When I did this the first time several years ago, I looked it up on the internet, and that was about $400,000 worth of silver in today's value and $2.5 million in gold in today's dollars. Big treasure, huh? So he put this in his knapsack and got on his horse and traveled to Israel alone, you think? No. Remember that raiders from Aram had crossed the border. This happened all the time. They didn't have national borders like we do. Remember that David later on, actually earlier, David had, before he was king, he had a band of men that were on the border, and that's what they did. They ran protection. They protected the Israelites from the border raiders. That's why when they went to Nabal and said, we hear you're shearing your sheep, let's have some, it was considered a natural fee. It was worth it. So, Naaman goes, he's going to take a pretty good group of soldiers with him, protect the gold, right? So think about this. You are the king of Israel, and there's the leading general of your enemy to the north, and he's leading a group of probably a few hundred soldiers into your territory. What do you think about that? Does that make you feel comfortable? Probably not. I have to keep checking the time, and I want to run over because it was when Paul was long speaking that Eutychus fell out of the window. And unless you have the resuscitory powers of Paul, you probably shouldn't take that risk. So I try. Or where I come from in Texas, they say, if you haven't struck oil after 30 minutes, quit boring. All right. The letter that he took to the king of Israel, again, the king of Israel, think he's a fairly important person? And we have the names of all the kings of Israel. If we want to word about it, we could figure it out. But he's not named. So you have two kings. You'd think they were a big deal. Not named. They're not that big in this story. Again, you've got the soldiers marching, right? Now, they claim they have treasure, but they're not going to be, flashing it around, right? And here's the letter. With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so you may cure him of leprosy. How do you like that? I'm sending you my favorite general so you can cure him of cancer. Just take care of it, will you? What do you think? Well, you probably think the same thing King of Israel did. King of Israel read the letter. As soon as he did, he tore his royal robes. He said, am I God? Can I kill people? Bring them back to life? There was no cure for leprosy. It's the same thing that happens today. One country will send another one an ultimatum, diplomatic message, and if they don't do what they're supposed to, war starts. It's as old, at least, as this story. And that's what he thinks is happening. Again, you have this armed group coming. Why does this fellow send someone to me to be healed of leprosy? He must be trying to start a fight with me. Perfectly logical thinker, right? Makes sense. So here we have the advancing army. Not a large one, but it's definitely an army. Elisha, oh, you see what I see? Another name. This isn't the prophet, this is Elisha. Okay, so we have how many names so far? 3. Naaman, Yahweh, and Elisha. Now I'm going to tell you ahead of time, there's a 4th name. It isn't in all translations, but there's a 4th name coming up, and that will help you understand this story. Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, which was a universal sign of grief and despair. So he sent the king a message. It said, why have you torn your robes? Tell a man to come to me. Then he will know there is a prophet in Israel. Which, by the way, is kind of what Little Maid said. There's a prophet in Israel. This repeated theme, there's a prophet in Israel, then he will know there's a prophet in Israel, tells us this is a big part of the story. Naaman has leprosy, so that he will know there's a prophet in Israel. How about that? It's like my business. It's a nonprofit organization. Didn't intend to be. That's just the way it worked out. Anyway, so this is part of the big part of the plot here. It has to be this way. Elisha sent a message. Okay, so he goes to, I've skipped a few verses here because I want to get to the meat of this. Naaman goes to the house of prophet Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger out to him. Now, you may think that Gehazi, who is mentioned at the end of this chapter, is in this story, but he's not. The story of Gehazi is a separate, really short story. Why do I say that? He's not named. His name doesn't show up in this story. He sends a messenger out to him. The messenger said, go. Wash yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, then your skin will be healed. You will be pure and clean again. Well, you'd think that Naaman would be happy. But Naaman is not happy. You know why? Customer service. Customer service. You know, you ever go to the doctor and the receptionist gives you a prescription and sends you away? I didn't even get to see the doctor, right? Or you get put on hold too many times. You ever have that happen? And someone says, well, just do this. And it's like, I want customer service. Now, he didn't call it that because it's a long time ago. What does he say? Naaman went away angry. Now, he's been told that he can be cured of an incurable disease if he will simply wash in the Jordan River 7 times. But he's an important man. He's highly regarded by his king, and he wants customer service. I was sure he would come out to me, and I thought he would stand there and pray to the Lord his God. Notice the Lord here is not capitalized because he's not a worshiper of Yahweh. This just means the ordinary sense of a Lord as a ruler. I thought he would wave his hand over my skin, that I would be healed. He didn't want Elisha, he wanted Benny Hinn. You know what I'm saying? He wanted a big show. He wanted a big event. And instead, he gets this messenger who says, go and wash yourself. And he's like, oh, I'm way more important than that. And then he asks this question, and here's an important question. And what about the Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus? Aren't they better than any of the rivers of Israel? Can I wash in them and be pure and clean? Now, this is a good question. And this is where it takes a little research, but you can do this. The tools these days are available easily on the internet. Although my wife tells me she doesn't Google very well. I found out the reason was that she was Googling in Facebook. But anyway, type A's always marry type Z's. What can I say? I love gadgets. She hates them, you know. Anyway. But he's got a good question there because, first of all, you notice there are two rivers. Not many towns, even in the ancient world, were fed by two rivers. That's an unusual situation. Damascus, as it happens, is one of the oldest, it may probably be the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. Still inhabited. And as it happens, Damascus isn't far from some mountains. And so both of these rivers, there's a picture of the Abana, what's called the Abana, are mountain-fed streams. They're clear. You know, you've been to mountain-fed streams, right? They're clear, they're cold, they're sweet, and they're beautiful. And that's what it is in Damascus. These two rivers are fed, and he's saying, you know, I traveled all this way, I don't get customer service, and I get a dirty river because the Jordan, for most of its length, looks like this. It's small. It's not very deep. It's muddy. It's muddy. So he's got a point. We got better rivers at home. But of course, what's he missing here? Is it the river water that makes him clean? Is it the action of going into the water that makes him clean? What is it that makes him clean? What's that? Well, it's obedience, but it's more even than that. It's faith. See, obedience comes out of, if it comes out of faith, then it's worthwhile. Remember, I don't have time to go out this morning, but the New Testament says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. And he also says, with anything that is not from faith is sin. So you can pay your tithe your whole life, and you can keep the Sabbath, and you can do all kinds of things in order to avoid punishment, and it's just sin. Isn't that something? Anything that's out of faith is sin. And so that's why it isn't the water that's going to purify him. It wouldn't purify me if he went back. It is faith. It is saying, I believe what the prophet says. I believe that God is acting through this prophet. Does that make sense to you? So what we see here is that his real problem isn't leprosy. He turned and went away. He was burning with anger. Again, you have an incurable disease. Now, leprosy, people talk about flesh falling off. It isn't leprosy that does that. Leprosy deadens the nerves. And so you cut yourself or you burn yourself and you don't feel it. And over time, those injuries add up and you lose parts of your body. It's a terrible, lingering death. He's got that. He's been told, you just go into the Jordan and you dip yourself 7 times and you'll be pure and clean again. And he goes away angry. He's got another problem that's even bigger than leprosy. Naaman's servants went over to him. They said, you are like a father to us. Everybody loves and respects Naaman. His wife's servant girl, his soldiers, do you see this? You are like a father to us. You know, there's some people that in the army, I remember a story was told back in the 50s of a guy who was in boot camp and he didn't get along with the army very well. And the drill sergeant said, I know you. He said, you're the kind of person that when I die, you're going to spit on my grave, aren't you? And he says, no, sir, I promised myself that when I got out of the army, I'd never stand in line again. So anyway, sorry about that. We're not having fun, we're probably not learning much. But he was loved by his people. That happens. He was loved in spite of being, their commanding officer and having to command them to do terrible things. You're like a father to us. What if the prophet Elisha had told you to do some great thing? But he only said, wash yourself. Then you will be pure and clean. You should be even more willing to do that. Why? This is the point we've been making. Leprosy was not the greatest threat to Naaman. I call this the leprosy of really good people. The great threat was pride, wasn't it? Didn't get customer service. Had to go to a dirty river. It says it's everything. He's going to go away. He's going to go away sick rather than healed, rather than put up, to submit himself to this person. That's the real problem. Fortunately, none of us here ever has that problem. C.S. Lewis says, man is never so proud as when striking an attitude of humility. Sometimes we do that, don't we? I do, sometimes. Not proud of it. Part of the human condition, isn't it? Get to thinking we're pretty good. Really good people, it's just so hard not to let that pride creep in there. It is the natural bent of the sinful person. And this is the problem with Naaman. He's a great guy. He is. He's a smart man. He's a great tactician. He is loved by his people. He's great people skills. And he knows it. Many years ago, I was at a church, and I apologize to all the pastors here, but we had a pastor who came in who was, I've never met an evangelist who had a smaller ego than mine. Is that fair to say? Okay. And one of the elders said, he's a very smart man. He was a gifted pastor, but he's not one bit smarter than he thinks he is. Anyway, it's easy for all of us to get there, isn't it? Okay, to look at our accomplishments and the good things we've done in our ministry and think, I'm pretty good. I'm not like so-and-so. That's the Pharisee's prayer, whoever prays it. So Naaman went down to the Jordan River. He dipped himself in it 7 times. He did exactly what the man of God had told him to do. Then his skin was made pure again. It became the skin of a young boy. Pretty exciting. Now, this is where the story of Little Maid ends, isn't it? He's cleansed, and he gets to go back. And he goes back home, and his wife and Little Maid all rejoice. Am I wrong? And again, I'm not criticizing that story. It's a wonderful children's story, but it's not an adult story. It's not the story the author was writing for you and for me. We'll talk about this later today. It was written first for others, but it's also written for us. It was saved because this is of universal importance. Are we having fun yet? Okay, good. Good. We're doing the right thing then. We end the story there, but the story does not end there. Naaman says, he goes back and he offers the $400,000 worth of silver and $2.5 million worth of gold and the 10 changes of raiment, which are probably pretty fancy stuff and very expensive all on its own. And Elisha refuses it. Why does Elisha refuse it? God cannot be bought. God cannot be bought. If you give a great gift to the conference, amen. Be happy in that. That's wonderful. but don't think you're buying anything with it. Taught a Sabbath school class one time, and had elder of the church happened to be sitting in, and it was about tithing. And I said at the beginning of class, before this class is over, I hope to convince you never to give another dollar to Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, I got his attention. What was my message? Don't give your money to the church, give your money to God. Okay? Give your money to God, and the church is a good avenue of doing that. But if you give your money to the church, you kind of own it, don't you? I mean, golden rule and all that, right? Can't buy God. God cannot be manipulated. We can go into the first 4 commandments, the first 3 commandments, and they're all about how God refuses to be manipulated. But we have other business here. I can see you want to accept a gift from me, said Naaman. Please let me have some soil from your land. Give me as much as a pair of donkeys can carry. Okay, something's up. Something really strange is up. Do you remember this part of the story? Good. Most people, it's just like, what? Where did that come from? Now remember, he didn't want to go on a muddy river a few minutes ago. And now he wants 2 donkey loads worth of dirt. Something's changed, hasn't it? People of that day believed that gods belonged to certain places. And Naaman wants the soil of Israel so he can worship the God of Israel on the soil of Israel. Okay? Now, this isn't just a pagan belief. Remember that Jacob, when he sees Jacob's ladder, he builds a stone monument, and he says, this is Beit El. This is the house of God. Go back and read it in Genesis. He knows it's the house of God because he met him there. See what I'm saying? That's what he believed. It's okay. We grow as a people. God's people have grown in their understanding. They've grown in their faith. I hope I know more now at 71 than I did at 21. Okay? By the way, we should probably let prophets do that too. Like girls who are 17 might not be as mature as girls who are young women who are 65 or 85. Maybe we should relook at some of that. Naaman wants some of the soil of Israel because that's where God is. Here's why I want it. I won't ever bring burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other God again. That's pretty absolute, isn't it? His problem wasn't leprosy. God used the leprosy to cure him of his pride and to bring him to the heart of God itself. Now, as I say, Little Maid's a good story. I think this is a better one. Okay. See the conversion of this man. And if you think this is rare, we have this in 1 Kings 20, where they're talking to the king of Syria, and the servant said to him, their gods are the God of the hills. Because, see, Jerusalem's in a hilly place. Therefore, they were stronger than we. We'll fight against them in the plain because we have gods of the plains, and our God will be stronger than they. So this is a common belief, okay? And you may ask, why didn't God correct it? Well, I don't know. He made a big leap from I'm pretty good to I want to worship this God and only this God forever, right? That's a lot of progress. But he's going to say something pretty soon, which, to be blunt, I'm a 4th generation Adventist. I don't know if that counts for anything. God has no grandchildren, but I can go back and find Adventists good ways back in my family tree. That's a whole other story, by the way. Why we've been here for 4 generations. Anyway, here's something really interesting. But there's one thing. One thing. Now, he had 2 requests. First one was 2 donkey loads worth of dirt so he can go, and he's got to put them in his backyard. Wouldn't call it that, but that's where he's going to put them. He's going to put them in his backyard, and he's going to put an altar there, and that's where he's going to sacrifice. This is what he said, right? Because he's going to worship the God of Israel, and he wants to be sure that it is the God of Israel he's worshiping. There's one thing I hope the Lord will forgive me. From time to time, my people will enter the temple to bow down to the god Rimmon. Why did I put an asterisk there? It's a name. We now have 4 names. And look who they are. Naaman, the great general. Elisha, the prophet. Yahweh, the God of Israel. And Baal-Rimmon, the God of Aram. Because that's who the story is about. Yahweh and Baal-Rimmon are contesting for the soul of Naaman. And God's grace wins. Good story. All right. Now, so from time to time, I'm going to have to go into the temple of Rimmon. Now, if, the way I was raised, say 4th generation, is, well, what kind of witness is that? If you've converted, why would you go to this other church, right? And then he says this other curious thing. Okay, when he does, let's go back here. Okay, my bad. When he does, he'll lean on my arm, and then I'll have to bow down there also. I hope the Lord will forgive me for that. What's with the king of Aram? He says he's so frail, he needs an escort to hold him up. I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm getting there. My sciatica, it's always an iffy thing. Tomorrow I may be leaning on somebody's arm. But, is he that frail? Is that what's going on here? Why is this a strange thing? And why is he going to go? He's going to have to bow down. Again, what kind of witness is that? Or were you raised differently than I am? Well, there's something that goes back very far back in time. The king of Aram might be 25 years old and full of vinegar. He would still go in on the arm of Naaman, more or less. We find this less and less today. I looked for it on the flag of North Dakota, but you have a seal, not the animal. But coats of arms used to be fairly common, and the ideas behind coats of arms go back millennia, the basic ideas. Now I've got a picture here of a simple one. And there's the coat of arms, and on it it'll have various devices that tell the family history. But you notice there's a lion on each side, right? There's a lion on each side of the coat of arms, okay? Well, you know what they call those? Don't say lions, okay? Because they're different things sometimes. They're called supporters. Now, this may sound like a strange idea. Here is the coat of arms of Maine. When Maine was founded, they have a sailor and they have a farmer, because they were what made Maine run. They were supporters. Okay? That's what that means. My Australian friends love this one because it's a kangaroo and an emu. These are distinctive Australian animals. Okay? And they're called supporters, right? Now you may think, well, that's a pagan idea, and I don't know if that makes any sense. This is from a long time later, and this business of supporters, what's that have to do with this? Well, I'm going to tell you that I think that Naaman is a supporter. He's the military supporter, and I think probably the priest or someone like that would be on the other side. I almost brought a picture of the State of the Union dress, but I wasn't sure which one to do to not upset people. Because at the State of the Union dress, behind the president are Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, right? Same basic idea. And you may think, well, that's all unscriptural. Well, how about this one? Here's a painting of the Transfiguration. Do you remember the Transfiguration? What was there? Jesus with Moses on one side and Elijah on the other. That's exactly what it says, isn't it? So it's the same imagery. Do you see that? Not only that, if you're a Jew and you see Moses, what do you think of? I heard it, I think. Moses is the lawgiver. And when you see Elijah, what do you think of? Prophet. He is the prophet of prophets. When they said, who do men say that I am? To Peter, Peter says Elijah or one of the prophets. Elijah is the ideal prophet. So you have Moses, the law, on one side, and the prophets on the other side. The law and the prophets are supporting Jesus. Do you see that? Pretty amazing image, isn't it? So this idea is very old, and it runs right through our brains as our psyche. We think of these things a lot this way. So that same idea was there, and that's what's going on. You see, here's the deal. In those days, they didn't have, a different church on every block. Nations had gods. And if you didn't worship your God, your nation's God, they had a word for that. Do you know what it was? Treason. You see that? So for Naaman not to go in to the temple of Baal Rimmon would be treasonous. Wouldn't accomplish anything. And he said ahead of time, I'm not going to worship any other God ever. Right? Burnt offerings, any offerings, only to the God of Israel forever. But please forgive me because when I go in, I have these ceremonial duties I have to perform. Does this make sense to you? When I go in there, this is part of the deal. We'll bow down. Will God forgive me for this? I love Elisha's reply. Go in peace. Go in peace. You see, why is it that God is so eagerly or so ready to pardon his bowing down in the temple of Rimmon? Because God knows he has Naaman's heart, right? He knows he has Naaman's heart. And so it doesn't matter to him what it looks like. Does that make sense? Naaman's real problem was pride. And what we see here is a God who has no pride. Isn't that amazing? The God you and I worship has no pride. That's why pride is a sin. It's thinking you're better at it. Well, the God who created the world is better than. But he has no pride. Doesn't matter. He wants you to be in the new earth so that, like in the garden, he can come and talk with you in the cool of the evening. That is the story of Captain Naaman. What do you think? No disrespect to the little maid. Is that a better story for adults? Is that a good story? Yeah. The Bible is full, overrunning with amazing stories like that. And when you begin to learn to read the Bible this way, as I'm going to share with you, you discover these treasures. That's the way I think it's a treasure hunt. It's an adventure. You discover these treasures around every corner. In the last 6 months, I discovered a treasure in the book of Luke, which I'll be sharing with you tomorrow. I'd never really given Luke as much credit as he deserved. We'll talk about that too. Within a year ago, I learned something about the Gospel of Matthew, and I thought I knew some things about the Gospel of Matthew, but I knew the facts, but I didn't get the significance, you know? That's what this is about, right? And that's the significant story we just told. All right. I'm going to pass over this. These are the things that are mentioned. They're the 4 names. We mentioned this already. And that's the whole point. Whenever you're reading a story, and there's a series of scenes, they're a consecutive series of events. Why do I say that the next story is not part of this one? Because it's over. He says, go in peace. Then Gehazi sends after him. Gehazi's name. And he says, well, I love this guy. I mean, I have to tell you, it's not for me. It's for these sons of the prophets that I want this stuff, right? We're asking for your donation today, but it's not for us. Yeah. Anyway, that story is a whole separate story because there's different names in it. It's Gehazi and Naaman. Elisha plays no part in that story. Okay? It's just a short story there. But this one is complete. You can feel the completion, right? Go in peace. It's over. It's done. All right. The stories that we're talking about were written for them. I'm going to have to, I'm about out of time. I got, 10 minutes? 13? Anyway, I'm going to, you keep an eye out, and if you have to go somewhere, you just get up and go. I'm going to talk a little bit yet. Like I said, I'm 71, so I understand sometimes at my age, the valves and the seals and the gaskets don't all work the way they used to. So anyway, you may need to do something. Stories were written for them, but they were preserved for us. Well, it seems to be done. I know it isn't. Okay. Yeah, no, there's more. There we go. It was their story first. This story was not written originally for you and me. It's an important story, which is why it was saved. Okay? It was preserved so that you and I can relive this story. Well, I'm having trouble. It's my own computer that's doing it. Okay. It's what they understood it to mean. One of the problems we have is we read our own world into their words. And so we start talking about New Testament ideas that they haven't had yet. And it's important to understand where they were in the history of Revelation. For example, one of my favorite examples, the first commandment. Does it say, I'm the only God there is, worship me? It says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. He doesn't tell them there are no other gods yet. By the time of Isaiah, and by the way, Isaiah is ahead of his time. Isaiah, you see, the Lord is one, O Israel. There is one Lord. There's only one God. They weren't ready for that yet. People can only move so fast at a time. And God understands this. I spent much of my life as an elementary school teacher. In fact, that was Andrews, I got my bachelor's degree in elementary education. They called me elementary ed. So. You laughed a little too hard at that. So then I got my master's in religious education. Guess what they called me then? All right, anyway. But I'm concerned, I know a lot about kids. I work with kids a lot. Teach kids. Teach junior high. That'll tell you something. Nothing left to frighten me. Anyway, readiness is everything for the individual and for a group of people. And we have a hard time making changes. And God recognizes that. So we have to understand it the way they understood it. And then, see how this is going to go. I don't know what's happening here, but it's fun. What it told them about God. And that's what we did with Naaman. Right? What did it tell them? It told them that he wasn't going to worship any other god, that these gods and these people were contesting. And they also got the bit about pride. It's pretty clear. Okay? So that's what we do. We retell these stories. We read, understand, re-articulate these stories. Okay. Only then does it become our story. Now, I hope that's true. Is anybody here going to leave with Naaman a new story today? Is it your story? Is it something different that you haven't had before? I hope so. And I hope you see that it's not my story. It was the original author's story. Beautiful story. All right. So I'm going to give you some homework. Fortunately, you don't have to do it. There will not be a quiz. But if you want to prepare for this afternoon's meeting, I'd like you to look at these texts. Genesis 24, verses 10 and 11. Genesis 29, verses 1 through 10. And Exodus 2:15 through 17. Okay. If I'm not overrunning my time, I'd like to take a few questions. Am I okay back there, guys? Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? I'm a teacher. I like questions. So. Are you just sort of stunned? There's a lot to take in the early morning. I understand that. Sure, good. Good question. That's fine.
It's always amazed me that God has put, he uses typology, in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And he expresses, the plan of salvation in all of these stories. This is one of them. But there's, like you're saying, there's many, many stories in typology that explain the gospel, and it makes you wonder. God had his finger in their lives, painting a picture. They didn't see it, but we can open the New Testament and see all of these Old Testament stories.
That's right, and they couldn't see it. Don't forget that. That the people who memorized the scriptures didn't get it. The Pharisees didn't get it. His disciples who were with him for 3.5 years didn't get it. Tomorrow we'll talk about that. Let me ask you this question. It's a follow-on to what you're saying. Whenever you read a book, I talked about how to read a book. What is the Bible about? If you were to summarize what the Bible is about in a few words or a sentence, what would it be? Let me tell you, I do this all the time. For example, I had a very gratifying experience. The book of Hebrews, okay, it's a very complicated book. Well, if you read it, there's a better priest in a better sanctuary with a better sacrifice under a better set of laws. So my summary for the book of Hebrews is better. Everything's better. Leviticus. Most people say, Leviticus. Yeah. So it's pretty boring. Leviticus, though, is about there are 2 words for Leviticus that I've summed it up as. One is holiness. That's why there are all the sacrifices. The gods of the ancient peoples were not holy. They were capricious. They were hungry. In the other creation tales, human beings were created to be slaves, to do the work that the gods didn't want to do, and to feed them with sacrifices. Nothing like the creation story of Genesis. So they weren't holy. They could be bought off with blood. God says, no, I'm not like that. And they had to get a whole new idea of God. That's a hard thing to do, isn't it? It's hard for you and me. And so that's why all the sacrifices and all the rings, we can go into that if you want to sometime. We'll talk about that. But the first thing is God is holy. He's so holy that you had to put a barrier around the mountain. And if you touched it, you were dead. So God is holy. So that's good, but then if God is holy, how can he help me? How can I gain help? And the other part of it is access. How do you get in? Through the blood of the Lamb. Do you see that? So Leviticus is about those two. I say that. So, any idea what the Bible is about? Well, I'll tell you what the scholars say. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah. What's that?
Why the difference
Between?
being sprinkled and being dunked?
Oh, well, it's a different. Instead of being sprinkled with blood, he's not being involved in the what they call the cultus, the religious practices. He's just getting to know God. Okay, and God knows what Naaman's problem is. I found, unfortunately, he knows what mine is too. And I keep getting tested on it because he wants me to be better. It's a big job. Somewhere my guardian angel is rolling her eyes. Anyway, the best answer I've found for that is that the Bible is about salvation history. It's about God's saving acts on behalf of his people throughout history. And here's one, right? In Naaman, there's a saving act on behalf of his people. All right. Anybody else have a question or comment? Yeah.
How do you know Naaman's problem was pride? Was that because he...
Because he was so angry and he wanted to go to a cleaner stream, and everything about it says, I'm better than this. And he wanted the prophet to come out and give him customer service. I thought he'd come out and wave his hands over. He says that. You know, all I got was a prescription from the receptionist. Okay. Well, if you like types and you like these things, you're going to love this afternoon. Because there are stories within stories. There are stories of different sizes in the Bible. Some of them are short, very short, 2 or 3 verses. Some of them are bigger than you can imagine. It's not until you see it that it hits you. And I'll quit now, but just briefly, I'll mention this, and that is, the Gospels all begin in different places. Now, we have this sanitized idea of the Christmas story, but there is no Christmas story in Mark. Mark begins with the preaching of John the Baptist. There is no Christmas story in John, but he begins before everything. In the beginning was the Word. I mean, what you know from John's beginning is he's got a big idea, okay? Matthew begins with a genealogy that begins with Abraham because he's talking to a Jewish audience. And he wants them to know that Jesus is the Messiah. It says so. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David. Okay? And Luke is a physician. He's the only one who tells us about the pregnancies. It's fascinating. Anyway, just think about that, because they're telling a story about the Savior of the world, but they're telling it from their perspective to a particular audience. And by the way, this may make you uncomfortable. I'm going to talk a lot about the author's intention, and I'm not talking just about God. Yes, God was inspired. God inspired them. I haven't doubted that. But the authors also were very active in the producing of this work. And that we need to appreciate that. Well, I'm trying to get my phone up because I want to give the benediction. They said I could give a benediction, and I like to do that. There's no better place to find benedictions than in the Bible. And my phone won't let me in. And please don't tell me there's a better way to do that. My son's in IT, and it's all right. Ephesians 3. Ephesians is one of my favorite books. It's going to take a while to come up here. may never come out. Anyway, benedictions in scriptures are great. I don't have a hard copy of the Bible with me right now. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Ephesians 3, yes. Benediction. Benediction is a blessing. Bene, good diction, words. It's a blessing. For this cause, I bow my knees unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and on earth is named, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might by his Spirit in the inner man, that that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the depth and the height, and to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge, that you might be filled with all the fullness of God. Now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Unto him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus throughout all ages, world without end. Amen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate those comments, getting some new perspectives here. Remind you that Ed will be back this afternoon at 2 o'clock right here, and you won't want to miss that. One other announcement that's been brought to my attention. Tomorrow there is a blood drive. It's going to be on the, I think the west side of the building, front of the building, and there are a number of slots yet to be filled. So if that is something that you can do, you can sign up at the locating office. So we will see you back here in a few minutes. 10 o'clock, we have the Browers here, God's Design for Marriage. So